I'd like to welcome all of you here to our PFAS webinar, PFAS webinar. I would ask if your video is on to turn it off. Make sure that you are on mute. If you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and we will get to the questions at the end of today's webinar. PFAS is a very important subject to the Canadian fluid power industry, among many other industries globally. There is a set of circumstances where PFAS has become an important discussion topic and will have some significant impact on many of us in the industry and many of our customers' industries and suppliers' industries as well. And so introducing the topic to us and some of the action plans are Bruce Calder, VP of Operations of Claigan Environmental. And with that, I'd like to introduce Bruce to go ahead and share his slides and welcome him to the webinar. Thank you, Bruce.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. Hope the computers all do what they're supposed to. Hello, I'm Bruce Calder, VP of Operations here and Consulting. So I'll explain a little bit of what we do. For those who don't know us. So trying to explain a lot of deep chemistry and regulatory stuff, especially if, doesn't necessarily go well as when do have a dinner party, something trying to explain what we do. So, and for a lot of people on this call, it might be the similar thing. So what we really do at a very high level is we prevent ADHD, prevent cancer, and trace tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, the conflict minerals, to the warlords in the Congo. And that's a really high level thing. We're going to work mostly on persistent organic pollutants. We're going to talk about PFAS today, and I'll explain that and where it's all coming from, where it's going, and what you actually have to do. But this is an oversimplification, most of what we work on. But in practice, in more tangible, we do a lot of consulting. What are your products? Where do you sell? What do you have to be compliant to in restricted materials, like the PFAS reporting, and what's the best way to do it? We normally focus on the output. As much as this Canada PFAS reporting, it's not all PFAS, it's not in all situations, it's kind of very specific output. And in particular, if you make industrial products where your PFAS is not necessarily even touched during use, it could be during installation, but not during use. The reporting rules are actually quite different. And so we focus on what the output is, because you're not really doing this for fun. You're doing this because you have to. And there's a reason why you're going to want to do reporting. I'll explain that later. There's a really important reason for your industry. But we look at the output. What do you really have to do at the end? And let's focus on the output and try not to boil the ocean and really actually look at what do you have to do. We also have our own test lab. We're probably the top test lab in the world for physical products, especially for PFAS, but for a whole bunch of other regulations, whether you're selling to, to EU ROHS or REACH or all these persistent organic pollutants or California Proposition 65. We do a lot of consulting and testing for both. And we do a lot of reporting and declarations. So this is year 5 of the Section 71 surveys we've been doing. So this PFAS reporting is a particular part of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. I think I'm going to show briefly where it fits in to explain some other things that are going to appear. So when the other things appear, you have some idea where it came from. But these are annual reporting. They're all one time, happens every year. This year's PFAS. Last year, it probably didn't affect you as much because it really came down to whether you had palm oil in your product. So potato chips is quite affecting, different hydraulics, less so. Next year is going to have some flame retardants in it. Totally different chemicals than PFAS may impact you again. We're definitely the world's leader in PFAS in physical products, like pumps or computers or cookware or Wi-Fi routers. So we're the only private company included in the PFAS regulations of the United Nations. We submitted this year, mostly related to the water-soluble salts, this PFOA thing that'll come up a bit later in the conversation. We submitted for industry, including a lot of the hydraulics industry into Europe, to make sure that your fluoropolymers were not restricted. There is a plan to restrict all PFAS, including fluoropolymers in Europe. That's mostly kiboshed right now. Just some low-hanging fruit, which we'll talk about later, which will get restricted, like fluorocoatings in food contacting taco bowls. like paper bowls. So as industry and restaurants have to move away from plastic packaging, they're often moving to paper. Paper is pretty awful at waterproof. You'll leak right through it. But you'll notice if you get a taco bowl with your Mexican mix in it, it's not leaking through the paper. That's mostly because they have fluoro coatings on it. That kind of thing is getting regulated in Europe. The stuff in hydraulics and pumps and PTFE packing and that kind of thing is not going the way of restrictions. But that took advocacy and will probably still take some advocacy. We submitted, there's going to be new restrictions in Canada around not all PFAS, some water soluble salts that can rarely in your product be created from your products. Mostly you'll get them from makeup, firefighting foam. I'll show you some examples later. Australia is restricting some of the water soluble salts. So most of what you use for PFAS are fluoropolymers or fluororubbers. They're solids. They're not what's found in human. They're not water soluble. They don't dissolve in water. Like one of the biggest ones is a frying pan. It doesn't contain any of the PFAS found in water in humans, nor does it degrade into it. It's picked on because people can visualize it, but it has nothing to do with the problem. Makeup, yes, quite a bit of the problem. Frying pans, no. We submitted with industry, a large number of stakeholders to the US CFPA. One of the things we submitted is actually a comparison against a whole bunch of parameters of temperature and chemical resistance and acid resistance and radiation resistance and a whole bunch of parameters, all the different fluoropolymers, also with all the replacements, silicone and PVC and nitrile rubber and all these things. And usually when the fluoros are chosen, it's pretty obvious from a performance point of view why they're being chosen. So a very common PFAS or fluoropolymer in your everyday life. So at work here, we have an infrared camera. And it's really handy for a lot of things. And I do recommend, if you ever buy a house, infrared camera is fantastic because it'll actually see where, especially in Canada, it's important, where the cold is coming in the house. You see it really easily, where the water damage is. But if you take your actual infrared camera around your home or office, the hottest thing in your office will often surprise you. And even in your home, even your stove is normally not necessarily your hottest radiating item. Usually your biggest heat radiator, other than your furnace itself, is your Wi-Fi router. It's pumping out huge heat. And to do that, if you had wiring inside, which is PVC, it wouldn't survive the heat. So it uses fluoropolymer wire, and they're everywhere. We also submitted to the US states and who are looking to regulate PFAS and fluoropolymers and why they're unavoidable uses. And we'll talk about how a lot of the different notified bodies or governments are going to look at your products. And we're also an ISO 7025 accredited lab. And that's actually really handy for a lot of these things where there's a lot of PFAS and fluoropolymer myth, legend, whichever, like, oh, frying pans create what's in humans and water. I'm like, no, we have a test lab. They don't actually have anything. One of the problems, and we told the Canadian government this, you guys are copy pasting each other. And that's why it's going to come up. We're going to talk about the reporting today, the part you have to do, and why it's actually important to your industry. Now, hydraulics, we do a lot of work in hydraulics. We've done these PFAS reporting, these Section 71 reports for a lot of different companies, whether they're actually in the seals industry or the pumps or larger products. We were one of the presenters on PFAS at the Hydraulics Institute in the US side, Washington, D.C. in November, talking a lot about this. And a lot of the conversation was going to come up where industry is trying to separate the verbiage between the PFAS found in humans and water, which is a water-soluble salt, and the fluoropolymers and fluoroelastomers you use. It's because everybody tries to call both of them PFAS, but they're not that related. What's being found in humans and water supplies is not that related to what's in your product. It's like oil and vinegar. They have some similarities, but they're quite different. So I'm going to talk a lot about it from the practical point of view of the way a lot of industries looking at these. And the reporting you do for Canada actually has a lot to do with these differences. The difference between fluoropolymers and the water-soluble salts. They're actually reported very differently in Canada. There's a good reason. We also do a lot of education. We have a YouTube site. You can just go Claigan YouTube. There's lots of great stuff there. Lots of great stuff in PFAS. Lots of great stuff in other regulations. Like we did one. We had 500 attendees to our webinar last week on all the new restricted materials requirements for 2025, some which are Canada and US and a lot in Europe, and explaining what the workload is if you're selling internationally products like pumps and that kind of thing in 2025. What's the work? So back to the main topic, where this all comes from. I'm going to talk about where it comes from because it's going to kind of explain why it's a one-time thing, why it's going to be different next year, why you're going to get something else this fall which is repetitive. I'll explain a lot of it. So the Canadian Environmental Protection Act has a lot of stuff underneath it. And to regulate a substance in Canada, by the way, the US is not that different here, is it has to get on the toxic substance list. Once it's on the toxic substance list, it doesn't change the regulation of your product. What it does is it enables, from a budget perspective, the Canadian government to spend money to manage the risk of it. When they're looking at adding it to a toxic substance list, they normally do a Section 71 notice, which is what this PFAS notice is. This is what this January 2025 PFAS reporting notice is. And it's related to whether or not what's going to go on the toxic substance list. And if it goes on that list, it doesn't actually make it restricted. It enables, from a budgetary point of view, the Environment and Climate Change Canada now, to spend money on how they should regulate. Not even regulating it, but how they should do it. So where we're at, these are one-time notices, and there's be one every year, and they don't have to be every year, but they are. This one's PFAS. Last year was a whole variety of strange things, which mostly end up being palm oil. Next year is going to be a whole bunch of wild chemicals that you probably won't recognize. Most of the key ones for you will be flame retardants. So if it gets on this list, like strangely enough, plastic manufactured items made it on Schedule 1. So these are items made of plastic. So that's why the next stage for these is they try to determine what the risk management measure is. What's the risk management for plastic? The concern about plastic is really around the fact it builds up in the environment and floats onto beaches and stuff like that. So this time they can do more data gathering under Section 46. These numbers don't mean anything to you. What's going to matter to you is the Canadian Plastics Registry. So I'm not really talking about today, but any electronics or your plastic packaging, which goes to consumers, has to be reported in September of this year. Any of your plastics in your electronics or plastics in your packaging that goes to institutional or industrial users in Canada has to be reported in September of 2026. That's going to be a big workload for a lot of people here. You have to report every year for the Canadian Plastics Registry for 3 years. PFAS, what we're talking about today, is a one-time. The Plastics Registry under Section 46 is every year for at least 3 years. And that, for most of you, I don't think very many of you have any consumer uses or significant consumer uses, but any of your plastic packaging or the plastic in your electronics needs to be reported in the Canadian government institutional customers in September 2026. And that's going to be September 2026, September 2027, September 2028. A lot of work there. And then eventually, some will lead to restrictions, which there aren't too many in Canada. There is one, short chain chlorinated paraffins, which is a substance. So when you get a power cable, and PVC is normally rigid, like your eaves, troughing, or gutters. To make it flexible, they add a plasticizer usually called the phthalate. It's the main cause of attention deficit, unfortunately. It makes it flexible. To make it so the phthalate stays in the PVC, they add a short chain chlorinated paraffin, which is inherently harmless, but it builds up in the environment. It's a bioaccumulant. And it's banned at basically 1,500 parts per million in all products. And you only really see it in PVC and maybe in conveyor belts and fan belts. But sometime this year, they're likely, depending on the government, publish a number of additional restricted substances. And a lot of these are flame retardants, they'll have impact. It's a topic for another day, but you're going to start to see, depending on the government, of course, new restricted substances in Canada. There's already one right now. There'll be a whole bunch more theoretically. They're scheduled. We'll see if they're published. But right now, they're supposedly going to be published last year. We will see. But this is the overarching thing, where the main thing we're talking about today is the PFAS side. But it's part of a bigger puzzle. And the reason why it's coming out in this really obscure way, this Section 71 notice, this reporting notice, is because of the way the Canadian Environmental Protection Act works. It's the instrument that allows this to happen. So it doesn't have its own legislation. It's part of CEPA. So that's what allows Environment Canada to mandate the thing you're going to have to report. And you probably have lots of questions by now, and this isn't very specific on what you have to do yet. Feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll get to them at the end. But this is where it comes from. It's a one-time. It's empowered by here. That doesn't really help you do what you have to do. Now, this is a mandatory data gathering notice under Section 71. Section 71 is what gives it the legal power that you have to do it. It applies to importers and manufacturers of specific PFAS. So one of the differences between it and the US reporting is this isn't all perfluoroalkyl substances, not everything that has a fluorine molecule on it. It's 3 specific lists, and I'll explain that. If you import it in a chemical form, powders, liquids, gases, you're in scope, or even if you import it as a physical product. So you bring it in as a pump with gaskets in it. Now, this is based on the importation, unless you actually make PTFE or similar here. It's really in the importation. So again, for example, if you make a pump here and one of your distributors imports the PTFE seals, they're responsible for it. You're really responsible for what you're importing yourself. The reporting date is January 29th of 2025. It's one-time reporting. There is a very straightforward ability to get an extension. You can get an extension for at least 3 to 6 months. You'll have to answer 3 questions. What have you done so far to complete the reporting? What data have you gathered so far? What are you doing? What have you gathered so far? And what more data, what advantage to Canada would there be if you were given more time? And when they reach out to us, we can help you with an extension letter. It's a particular letter format. And if you submit it before this date, which is about 9 days from now, it's usually straightforward to get, especially in a complex products like in hydraulics. It's easy to get an extension. It'll give you at least 3 to 6 months, depending on how much you can justify. When in doubt, reach out. We can help out. But that's the key thing. So this is the deadline. However, it is straightforward to get an extension for 3 to 6 months. And I'll explain what you have to do, but the key thing to get back to, there is the ability to get an extension. When to reach out to myself or anyone here, and we can guide you the right direction. Now, one of the big things industry's trying to do, especially in hydraulics, is separate to the major groups. I'm going to ignore gases right now. There are fluorogases. I'm just going to ignore them right now. There's the PFAS, the water-soluble PFAS. These are things that dissolve in water. This is not your Teflon seal. There's obviously reasons why your PTFE seal doesn't dissolve in water. Quite hydrophobic. So this is what's found in water or humans. This is the chemical that's causing fear and creating regulation. And there's the fluoropolymers and fluoroelastomers you use. They're both technically PFAS. What a lot of especially the manufacturers of fluoropolymers try to do is try to separate the words and separate the regulation around them between the things that are water soluble that end up in humans and water and the fluoropolymers you use. You know, your Viton, your FGAM, your PTFE, your FEP, your THV, all that kind of stuff. These solid fluoropolymers are not what's found in humans and water. So generally what you're using, even though for very specific circumstances, they could have some water-soluble fluorosalts in it, they don't have to, and it's not core to what they are. And they're quite different. It's not PTFE that's being found in humans and causing kidney problems. So the actual whole health problem is, in a nutshell, as much as whatever news or journalist will say what the problem is, what it really is the water-soluble salts are very powerful surfactants, detergents. And what they do is inside your kidneys, you have a protein surfactant. It's very important to separate things from your blood to your urine. You have to cross fat barriers. You need a detergent surfactant. And this one messes up that function, and you damage in your kidneys your poison filter. So it creates kidney damage. And if you damage your poison filter, kidneys, everything happens. Alzheimer's, heart, all bad things. So all the things they can try to trace to water-soluble salts like PFOA are really around the kidney damage. It's much more powerful. It's about 10,000 times more powerful surfactant than your laundry detergent. However, it's not nearly the same concentration as your laundry detergent, but it's basically extremely powerful laundry detergent. And that affects the function of your kidneys, which, by the way, your laundry detergent does also. Now, why is it being regulated? I'm going to talk why, because it explains why advocacy is important and why reporting is important. And I'll talk about the details of reporting. So how do we get here? What's been driving regulation has been journalism, like headlines like Texas farmers say sewage-based fertilizer tainted with forever chemicals poisoned their land and killed their livestock. That's a very, very frightening statement. Probably not true at all, but that's a statement. Well, not true that they've said that. It's quite true, but whether it actually did is quite low. And it's these headlines, and I'll show some really tangible examples in a moment that are really creating the legislation and creating the regulation, but they're not a lot to do with you. These are all water soluble, like that water going into the cup there. Your pump or your products may actually enable the fact that water gets there, but any PFAS found in there has very little to do with your products. There are lawsuits, and people, often your lawyers, say, look at these big lawsuits that DuPont or Chemours has. That's mostly because they're using, there is a fluoropolymer used in fabric that dissociates, breaks down very easily, the waterproofing, into the chemical that they find in water. There is a fabric waterproofing one that breaks down. It's a very different chemical than the Teflon powder or FKM rubber that you use. It's actually quite a different chemical. And movies and TV. So the actor who played the Incredible Hulk in the Avengers was in a movie, created a lot of fear. And if you don't think this has huge power, especially in my industry, it's like how many people have asked us about microplastics in the last 3 weeks because they saw a documentary on Netflix. I'm like, if you don't want to eat microplastics, don't wear makeup. Microplastics, another word for microplastics is glitter. So this is what's creating it. And I'll show a very tangible example. This is not different than Canada. So the US state of Maine is in some ways much more useful than Canada because all their PFAS data is public. Canadian one is not as easy to access. So this is, and the state of Maine has in the US been farther ahead in regulation for good or ill. Like the first place we have to do advocacy in the US side is the state of Maine. And they put all their PFAS results on a map. So we picked one. And everything I'm going to show, by the way, it's going to take longer to explain than the actual problem. And the reason I'm going to explain it is because it explains a lot of why reporting ends up being important. And I'll talk about what you have to report and how it all works. Okay, so we picked one on the New Brunswick border. My wife's family's from New Brunswick, so I picked that one. But it's one of the top sites. It's also been in the news. This is the Holton Mobile Home Park. Probably means nothing to you. It's in the county of Aroostook, which does actually sound like a New Brunswick type thing, but this is the state of Maine. It's funny when I explain to often people in the US what New Brunswick like. It's like Maine, but more so. So the Maine, this is a news story from 3 years ago. State of Maine, this is one of the ones that really galvanized a lot of their action, regulation. What is kind of strange is all different jurisdictions for PFAS copy each other. So if Maine does something, believe it or not, Canada will take notice and they'll enter. They like to copy paste. It would be nice if Canada had their own test capability and actually looked themselves outside of just water at your types of products and such. But in absence of that, they just copy paste each other. So this is the Holton Trailer Park. It's relied on bottled water for 4 years after finding PFAS in its well. They're not finding PTFE. They're not finding your FKM. They're not finding AFLAS. This is, I'll show you what it actually is. Now, one of the nice things in the US is their water test results are a lot more accessible. And so this is the Holton Trailer Park in Maine. It's got chloroforms and nitrates and nitrites. That's fertilizer. That's stuff coming from farmers' fields. And then it's got a number of PFAS. The big regulated ones are PFHXS. HX is hex, 6, like hexagon. PFOS is octagon. And S is sulfonate. It's got a sulfur atom. And it's 62 or 71 times the regulated levels. And this is PFOS. And this is one of the PFAS found in water, and PFHXS. And there's PFBS in the top right from the same sort of source. It's a surfactant. By the way, in your Viton, historically, there is one. It's called 6,2-flotylamine sulfonate. It can't degrade into any of these. It can degrade into some smaller versions of the PFOA family, and that's a longer explanation. Your Viton doesn't need it. The substance it is not regulated right now. It's to make Viton or FKM, the emulsion surfactant for it historically is of this family. And it's a long explanation, and it doesn't really need it. And most of your suppliers have got out of the business of it in 2023 or 2024. They still make FKM. They just don't use that negative polymerization agent. Your Teflon, on the other hand, should be fine for this kind of thing. So this is surfactant. PFOS doesn't degrade from anything you make. Now, one of the things we always look at when we're talking to a government agency, do you have arsenic in this? No, it's not mining. So surfactants used in mining all the time, especially in coal mining, like this is Kentucky, you'd see an arsenic. And you open up the ground, you see arsenic. That's why rice has lots of prosecutions for arsenic. It's the irrigation waters downstream from mining. You open up the ground, you get arsenic. And so PFOS, surfactant, is used very commonly in mining to keep the dust from aggregating. There's no polychlorinated biphenyls. This is a really big problem in Canada. Remember that taco bowl I mentioned with it's paper? And it used to be plastic, but it doesn't leak. Like we had taco bowls in last month for lunch and learn. They're paper. They didn't leak. There's only one really good reason they don't leak. And we tested with our lab, and it's definitely got a fluoroacrylic coating. PCBs are polychlorinated biphenyls. They're banned in Canada around the same time as the very first Star Wars movie, around 77. We do find them in water, almost always downstream from pulp and paper. The chlorination process for paper often creates very low levels of PCBs. The people who make those taco bowls, that coating will leak this kind of thing out into the water supply. We don't see any PCBs. This is not pulp and paper, which for the state of Maine or New Brunswick is a fair thing to check. Pulp and paper being, a relatively big thing in both those jurisdictions, not PCBs. So it's not pulp and paper. This is firefighting foam. So the key thing about firefighting foam and why it's allowed some of these right now, imagine you're fighting a big gasoline fire. And the thing is, there's fire all over there, and you're spraying out foam, and you want the foam to get over everything that's on fire. But as the firefighter, you don't want to walk into the fire. So what they do is they add surfactants, very waterproof surfactants, which are fireproof surfactants, like PFOS is, and it creates the detergent creates a frictionless barrier. So basically you have gasoline that's burning, and you want the foam to spread as fast as possible on it. So you add this surfactant, which basically removes all the friction on top of gasoline. That foam spreads really fast. And that's why you see it in firefighting all the time, because it allows you to put some foam here and it's spread over the entire fire very quickly, instead of the poor firefighter walking through the fire and having to spray each thing individually. They prefer to spray it, have it spread. And that's why it's really common in firefighting foam. It's a sulfonate. This is a surfactant of firefighting foam. So to prove a point in the state of Maine, and the reason I'm going to mention this is why, and it comes back to, you'll see why it comes full circle to reporting for your products, which are not this. This is the Holton Mobile Park. We went to Google Maps. So it's a surfactant. Big question for us is, how far is it from the nearest airport? Now, in Google Maps, you're like, wait a second. It's at the end of an airport runway. Back, if you look at the bottom right of this picture, you can see the runway. So, and there's a little creek in between, which will transport. It's why they also see like fertilizer and nitrates and other fecal matter type stuff, because the water system right there. But it's the end of a runway. And airports will put down firefighting foam pretty well anytime they're worried about a plane crashing, like preemptively, to stop it. So a lot of this particular regulation is because they put a mobile home at the end of an airport runway. This has nothing to do with your product. There are things your product can't do, and I'm going to talk can and can't, but this is why the knowledge base and reporting, and I'm going to explain very much the Canadian situation, why it's really important. So here you are, U.S. state, one that Canada copies and recognizes for PFAS, doing tons of regulation for many reasons. One of them is they threw a mobile home park with huge news about it at the end of an airport runway. Yes, it's going to have the surfactant from the firefighting foam from the runway. Not shocking. Okay, so industry is doing a lot more to try to separate. By the way, there's a video here. It's Gujarat Fluorochemical. It's a German Indian company, which is doing a lot more in educating industry and companies on fluoropolymers versus that PFAS surfactant we just saw in the trailer park. We're trying to separate the terminology. We're saying fluoropolymers are not bad things. They're actually quite good things. And there's a video here. I'm not going to go into it, but it goes through Bob's life. And it's a really good video where it actually shows, it's quite accurate actually, all the different places he runs into fluoroelastomers or fluoropolymers in his life. And there's some hydraulic things in here, but there's medical devices and stoves and fridges and cars and tons of other things. So full video. So one of the things they're focusing on, these are the things that you use in your product. Use fluoropolymers like PTFE and ePTFE and PFA and FKM and FFKM, which is basically FKM, but more so, PVDF and FEP and ETFE, which is like polyethylene and PTFE at a child, and the chlorinated version of it, and fluorosilicon, which is mostly medical, and probably the main fluoropolymer in Canada is the waterproof coating. So when we went to Canada about a lot of these things, they're saying, well, we can ban it in fabric. I'm like, well, not really that quickly. Yes, maybe it's a good idea, but it's used in all the winter gloves. And Canada said, no, it's not. Fluoroacrylic coatings are not used in winter gloves. And we're like, we have a test lab. We're pretty sure. They're like, no, we did a consultation, and one company reported one. And it said they don't no longer use fluoroacrylics. So it's not used in Canada, so we can ban them. And that's what's going to come up in reporting is if nobody tells them it's being used, they can ban it easily. If you tell them it's being used, it actually is very hard to restrict it. They have to do socioeconomic evaluations. They have to do consultations. And that's why reporting, even though it's mandatory and a pain in the arse, will be better for you in the long term. You want to report. And then this actually affects, wanting to report does affect how you report a very tiny bit. So we said, no, it's in winter gloves. And they said, no, it isn't, because nobody reported it being winter gloves. Okay, so in February of 2024, we bought 14 pairs of winter gloves. 13 of them, kids' winter gloves, had fluoroacrylic coatings. It was on all of them. We sent it back to the Canadian government. It's like, see, it's everywhere. And maybe regulating might be a good idea, but don't do it overnight. It's everywhere. And there's a couple others. Very high-end pharmaceuticals. It's the waterproofing barrier. Your screen on your laptop or your iPad right now, whichever, has an anti-smudge coating. It's very complicated fluoropolyether. One of the problems with fluoropolymers is they don't stick to things. So when you have things you can't heat up to high temperature and can't fuse fluoropolymers to, you have to create really exotic ones where one half of the molecule is a fluoropolymer and the other half is whatever you want to attach it to. So fluoroacrylics is one is acrylic paint, so it can attach to like acrylic fabric, and the other half is the fluoro, which blocks water and oil. Like this one, you need something to attach to the glass or silicon in your screen and then have the fluoro part stick out. And then in your industry, you'll also have some terp polymers like THV, which is like if PTFE and PVDF and FEP had a child, that's THV. These are what you normally use in your product. Of them, the only one that produces really a dangerous chemical in any amount is the fluoroacrylics in fabric. So what you have to do. So one of the questions you get, so you have to report all the PFAS in your products. Nope. You're like, but it's PFAS reporting. Okay. Canada, it's a bit confusing. It's actually not PFAS reporting. It's a Section 71 report that contains 3 lists of substances, which are all perfluoroalkyl substances. So there are 3 positive lists. And for a chemical to be reportable in your product, it has to be on the positive list. Like PFAS, which is not an uncommon fluoroelastomer fluoropolymer in your industry, is not on the list. PTFE is, FKM is, PFAS is not. Neither is FFKM. To be reportable, a substance has to be one of 3 lists. The first list has almost nothing to do with you. It's 273 substances. They're almost all liquids and powders. So the phosphated fluoroester in makeup, like the main thing of foundation, which turns into PFOA, turns into bad stuff. Yes. If you use Krytox, which you probably do, Krytox is a chemical. If you use Krytox lubricant, which is a pretty high-end lubricant, yes, it's in this grouping. It's one of the few chemicals you may have to report. Most of your PFAS are going to be solid things. The PTFE or FEP or FKM or PFA or whichever makes up your seals or valves or other items in hydraulics. But you might use Krytox, and Krytox is a liquid. It's a polyfluoroether. It's in list 1. List 2 are mostly what you're interested in. They're the solids. They're the fluoropolymers. That's where PTFE is, FKM is there, PVDF is there, THV is there, ETFE is not. So imagine you're one like FFKM, Calder, not on the list. You don't have to report it. It's a PFAS, and you have to report in the US, but not here. It has to be on the positive list. And so this is like your PFA wire, your Teflon frying pan, your PTFE seal. List 3 are mostly gases. So I'm going to slow down my speech. Up until now, I've been going a little bit fast, and my education actually originally is all in French, and so I empathize with people that are not necessarily used to going full speed. So I'm going to slow down from here on in. But you basically be reportable. Your substance has to be on the 3 list. List 3 are mostly gases. There are some fluororefrigerants. They were handled in a previous consultation, so they're not on this list. Most of what you're going to be interested in is the middle list, which are the fluoropolymers and fluoroelastomers, and maybe 1 or 2 on the first list, like Krytox, a very common lubricant. Otherwise, most of the rest don't apply to you. And the number of your PFAS that you use in hydraulics are not on any of these lists and are not directly reportable, though you may wish to report them. And I'll explain the rules around that for a good reason. So if you have a substance on a list, you have to report it. Not necessarily. You have to also meet reporting thresholds based on your use. This chart's going to be really complicated. Feel free to reach out and we'll help you with your individual situation. So if you're like Krytox, which is a substance, is a liquid or powder, which is the first list. If you're on a listed article, so most of your products won't be, there's a list of very specific physical articles or physical products that if you touch it during its intended use, not during installation, like if you take a seal and you install it, that's not during use. During use, if it's touched, or it's a children's product, which should be few here, or apparel or cookware, and it's like Krytox is a liquid, your reporting limit is 10 grams. It's very, very low reporting limit. Or if you sell Krytox in tubes, it's a 10-gram reporting limit. But if your Krytox is inside your system, not as a mixture, inside your pump, you need 100 kilograms before it's reportable. There's 100 kilograms, not of the system, of the Krytox, the individual PFAS. If you have PTFE, which is a solid polymer, and it could be if it's hand contact or a mixture or everything else. So any situation, PTFE is only reportable when you get up to 100 kilograms. If you have gases, it's the same thing, it's 100 kilograms. That affects a lot of things. So probably the most common PTFE use is actually as an anti-drip agent in electronics. Basically, ABS, plastic, when it burns, it drips, which is not allowed under CSA or UL flame retardancy rules. You can't, if something's burning, it's not allowed to drip burning to a new area and continue the fire or extend the fire. So what they do for ABS, they add about 0.5% PTFE, Teflon. When it burns, PTFE creates a webbing and stops the drip. It's pretty well in all electronics. It's in almost all of any ABS in a fire zone, you get PTFE, about 0.5%. It takes a lot of electronics, though, to get up to 100 kilograms of PTFE in that situation. So people make laptops, sure, if you're selling, 100,000 laptops, a couple 100,000 laptops in Canada, those guys will get up to PTFE flame retardancy. Otherwise, it's mostly major uses, like it's your valve, your packing material, that kind of thing. It has to be something up in a high kilogram. So this is very complicated. Feel free to reach out. We'll help you. And I'll explain how we actually do this in practice. So most of you guys will be in this situation. Also, when you report, this is also a very important thing. If you're a listed article, like it's a children's product, or you sell tubes of Krytox, you have very complex reporting. If you meet the 10 grams or 100 kilograms limit, it's complex reporting. There's a lot of details, your volumes, your concentrations, your degradation products. But if it's Krytox inside your system, the reporting is actually very simple. It's a very simplified reporting. Same thing with your PTFE. Imagine you have packing materials or seals, or you have gases. If they're in dermal hand contact during intended use, not installation, but intended use, or they're in children's products or a frying pan, they have complex reporting. There's a list of applications. Everything else has very simple reporting. So imagine you end up with more than 100 kilograms of FEP inside your pumps or your hydraulic system or valves, normally not touched during intended use. You may have to report it, but the reporting is actually relatively simple. and we can help you with it, but it's actually a relatively straightforward thing. It's not a complex supplier information thing. It's actually a very, very simple thing. Now, what is true about PFAS reporting in Canada and the US, if you report the use of a fluoropolymer or fluoroelastomer and why you're using it, restriction by the US and Canada is actually very difficult. This is why they could ban that substance in winter gloves, is because nobody reported it. The second industry reports it, especially a number of entities, regulation changes. To regulate, like, so imagine, I don't know, 8 of you report PTFE in valves. At that point in time, almost impossible to restrict it in Canada. They have to really want to, and they have to do consultations and socioeconomic impact evaluations. It creates a significant barrier to restriction. So, short summary, you want to report, especially for your main uses. Some people say, well, I don't want people to know I have PTFE. Google your company name and PTFE for a lot of you, and you'll see it. It's not a secret, and PTFE is perfectly benign anyways. Reporting protects your products. So it's a pain, but it's actually a little bit easier to report now, clearly what you use it for, so it doesn't get regulated. It's actually really difficult both in the US and Canada to ban a substance in your product. There's a lot of barriers to it if it's used by industry, or it's difficult to ban in your application. So Canada PFAS reporting also has a combination of mandatory and voluntary reporting. You might say, why would I do voluntary? Mostly because of the previous page. So the mandatory reporting, keynote, 100 kilograms is a lot. There isn't that many applications. Now in your industry, you will have some that are over 100 kilograms of PFAS. Sure, your valves and that kind of thing could be well above that. That's 10,000 frying pans a lot. Valves, it's not so bad. That's like 10,000 frying pans. That's a lot. Or 500,000 heat shrinks. We have some companies that use, PVDF heat shrinks. It's a lot of them. The voluntary reporting is if you have a PFAS that doesn't meet reporting requirements. So either you don't meet the volumes or it's not on the list. Like ETFE, I can't remember, ETFE or Calder, one of the two, if not both, are not on the reporting list. But you don't want anybody banning your ETFE. So if it's important to your business, there is a declaration of stakeholder interest. It's very simple form and details, but it's basically saying, I don't meet the reporting requirements for this because either I don't meet the volumes or it's not on the PFAS is listed there, but I want you to know it's used, and you don't even have to say you use it. You can say your industry uses it. Once you say it's used, especially if there's more than one of you that says it's used, it's actually very difficult to regulate it. And declaration of stakeholder interest also means they will ask your opinion in any stage they try to regulate that chemical, which is very helpful because advocacies, a lot of what, if it wasn't for advocacy, all PFAS would be banned right now, which is kind of, ridiculous. The performance characteristics of PTFE and PFA and FKM and all that, the reasons often a lot of you use it, there's a really good reason for it. And so it'd be ridiculous to them to just ban. So beforehand, they didn't do a lot of reporting and they're regulating heavily. And a lot of advocacy changed that. Now they're asking whether you used it. If you don't tell them you use it, it could get regulated. If you tell them you're using it, could still get regulated, but it's actually really difficult to do. It'll take time and effort, and your opinion will be, they actually cannot, if you do declaration stakeholder interest, they cannot regulate it whatsoever without asking your opinion first. They're actually legally bound. Once you say, I'm interested in it, they have to ask your opinion. Gives you the chance to change their mind. In most cases, a lot of it's trying to separate industrial fluoropolymers from like consumer water-soluble makeup. It's a big difference. So the way we handle a lot of this complexity, all that weird reporting, we actually normally start with a questionnaire. One of the advantages, we're not doing this for the first time. We're not doing Section 71 surveys for the first time. We've done them for years, usually like this, 300 plus chemicals. We usually dumb it down. Do you have any situations where you may have reportable PFAS? We actually go through all the chemicals and the reporting limits and go, we ask you a handful of questions saying that really focus, can they possibly be in your products at a reportable level? If so, what products? We'll ask you questions, things like, one, to try to narrow down the work to a small section of work. Also, because some of you have a miscellaneous category where we ask them, do you have these things? And they say no, but we do have this thing, which we never really expected them to have, which does happen quite often, actually. So one, it's to really narrow down the work stream to extremely simple things, and also pick up the miscellaneous category. Sometimes companies have applications or uses of these, which we wouldn't have expected. And that's why we ask these questions like, do you have eyewear? Sometimes we get yes. Awesome. Do you sell over 50,000 of them? No. Okay, you could have one. You just won't have a reporting level of one. Almost all eyewear has a PFAS. So this is how we start every new Canadian notice. We actually give you a questionnaire. And the idea is just to identify the small list of actions, because there's hundreds of substances. Now, you'll know some of the PFAS you'll know off the top of your head. But instead of worrying about a complex supplier survey, for most of your products, it's going to come down to a handful of things. It can only be at a reporting level in these situations. It also identifies unexpected sources. So it's basically a very simple thing like, do you import any physical products? Yes. Do you import over 100,000 physical products a year? No, it changes what we're looking for. Do you import any clothing? No. Good. Don't have to worry about a whole bunch of things. Do you import any cosmetics? No. All right, that takes a lot of stuff off the board. And most of you, that it's going to be no, 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 no. Sometimes you import any electronics. Some of you will be yes. Do you import over 1,000 electronic devices a year? Yes. Okay, that changes things a bit. No, there's no way the electronics can affect your reporting. So we've done this for over 100 projects. We've done this for tons and tons of companies. A lot in hydraulics, but also like supermarkets and electronic stores and major brand owners and huge variety of things. People make guitars, barbecues, just everything you could imagine. So questionnaire, we simplified this project to like simple questions. Again, you don't have to, not all PFAS on the list, and they have very high reporting limits for a lot of things. So we go hunting and try to, also you don't have, this perfection's not required here. You just have to show you've done work. Here are the main question, do you have these things? Awesome. A lot of yours is going to come down to valves and hydraulics and quite straightforward thing, pumps. But some of you will surprise us with often with something a little obscure. Probably not children's products, but sometimes obscure. So instead of boiling the ocean, we try to focus on what's relevant. Get it down to the 2 or 3 questions. And we don't care about if, for a lot of you, especially big complex things, if you look at what you sell in Canada, the amount of systems you sell is relatively small number of SKUs, but the number of repair and spare parts and accessories is massive. We want to, clean that off the table. At the end of the day, it comes down to, yes, it's your couple different valve types. It's the fact that you sell this many electronic products. What's in the outer housing? Does the outer housing have it? That's about it. So we do questionnaire. What do they apply? Can they possibly be a reporting level? Step 2, based on what could actually be reportable, pursue those small number of things, which is often hydraulics, seals, and valves and packing material and that kind of thing, but there are some exceptions. And then we complete the reporting. Most of you should have simple reporting. Simple reporting is it's not touched during intended use, it's internal, it's industrial. The reporting is very simple. If you do complex reporting, it's science technical, and we can do it for you. So we do frying pans and such in Canada. There's a lot more complexity there. When you report, the main report is an Excel sheet. Most of the fields for most of you is not going to be PFAS. It's going to be your address, your contact person, the person that can bind the company, whole bunch of stuff like that. And, so excited, it's submitted through your GC key, your Government of Canada key. It's actually the individual's GC key. So if you're a Canadian citizen, you all have one, whether you know it or not. Like, it's amazing. You could sign in through your bank. What? Yeah, so the submission is actually done by a person under their Government of Canada key and then attached to the company. It's really weird. But US TSCA is the same, actually. It's under your social insurance number in the US. So it's your GC key. So it'll be an individual that has to submit it for your company attached to the company. So we can submit for you from a technical point of view, but you're not going to want us to because it's your tax key, actually. So what we do when they submit is we prepare the whole submission. It's an Excel sheet. It's really easy. And then web meeting in with you to submit it. It's odd. If you're not a Canadian citizen, you can get a GC key, no problem, which is kind of funny. It's like a tax code key, but you don't have to pay taxes. So it doesn't, there's no real downside to it. And it's really easy as a foreign national to get a GC key. Canadian one, it actually matters because it's your tax. It's like your social insurance number. It's kind of a big deal. Because you can sign into the system to report through your bank. Very weird. So you have your, your PFAS submission and then your tax submissions. It's a really strange system. So when you go in, we'll take you through. You have to go to a different section that takes you away from your own personal tax info that you submit. If you don't have mandatory reporting, because you don't have the volumes or that kind of thing. Check at the time. There is a declaration of stakeholder interest. We strongly recommend that if you don't have to report, you don't have volumes, or you're using imagine ETFE is not on the list, which I think it is, but you don't want people to ban it. So it's important to your company, but you don't want to regulate it. You submit a declaration to stakeholder interest saying, my industry uses ETFE and THVE and FFKM in valves and packing material or something. And we're interested if you have any actions in the future on it. And that's really what you have to submit. And that, at that point in time, once you tell them it's used in your industry, it's actually very difficult to regulate. So, of course, if you have something like, we have PTFE as an anti-drip agent in our Wi-Fi module to our product, lots of other people are going to cover it. It's not that important to us. You wouldn't bother with that. If you have nothing to report because you don't meet any criteria and there's really nothing important enough to you, you can do a declaration of non-engagement. This is actually a different system. We can help you through it. It's basically reporting saying it's to get checked off in the system against your company's name, saying we've gone through the Section 71 notice and we don't have nothing to do, and this is why. And so there's three submission types: the mandatory reporting and or the declaration of stakeholder interest. Many companies do both. They have things they have to report, and they have a couple of things they want to report because they want it regulated. And then if you have none of the first two, you can do a declaration of non-engagement. And I could go, there's the same sort of things can exist in the US. This is all PFAS. It's a little more complicated. It's January 2026. So the US version is January 2026. It's a little bit different than this one. I'm not going to bother this audience as much. The weird thing about it is you report PFAS by chemical, not products. You don't report pumps or flow meters. You report PTFE. And then what you use PTFE for. So it's a very different system there. I'm going to want to leave a lot of time for questions. So in the US, you don't report PTFE in pumps or in valves. You report PTFE, and then what is it used for? Insulator, flame retardant. It's kind of a different whole approach. So when we do Canada, you have to be in the list, and you report what product type has which PFAS. Here, it's a little bit different. You report, in the US, you report the fact you use PTFE and why do you use it, and the number of products that have PTFE, but no other more complexity. So it's got a neat system. So in the 2025, you're going to have Canadian PFAS reporting in January 29th. If you haven't done an extension, just reach out to us. We'll help you with it. September 2025, if in Canada, if you have consumer products or consumer plastic packaging, you're going to have to report to the Plastics Registry. January 2026 is US TSCA PFAS reporting. So the US PFAS reporting January next year. And September in Canada is reporting the PFAS in your electronic products and any of your plastic packaging that you give to institutions, other businesses or facilities. What do you place in the market? So almost all of you are going to have plastic registry reporting requirements in September 2026. Quite different than PFAS, related to the same regulations. Again, way we do it is questionnaire, try to simplify the question. You can go through all those very detailed steps on what's reportable and what's not. We've dumbed it down to simple questions. Do these chemicals apply to your products? Can they possibly be in your products at a reportable level? Take actions based on step one. That's only work on the stuff where you could actually have something to report based on the applicable substances and applications. By the way, everybody who is here today can have a copy of these slides, and you can go through. The law is kind of a hard follow, all the different reporting rules. We try to dumb it down to simple business questions, not chemical regulatory questions. And we go down to those specific applications, and then you complete reporting. So most of you will have simple reporting, and simple reporting is pretty simple, actually. And then the complex reporting, if there's a few cases, especially food contact, you might have complex reporting that you have to report a lot of more scientific-y things. Simple reporting, there's almost no science involved. You're just basically saying what PFAS you're using in what applications or what product types. So, apologize, some was a bit quick. I want to make sure you have all the content, the main details, but in this section, you can ask any questions you want. I'm just going to move the chat button to your other side so I can see it.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for that. That's significant information for sure. I don't see any questions in the chat. I want to remind everybody that, by the way, the call is being recorded, so you will have access to it. CFPA members will have access to it future time. I'd like to open the floor to questions to make it a little bit easier since there is a significant crowd here. Use the raise hand function at the top of your screen. I don't see any questions coming up. Bruce, I do have a couple of questions though. Is it fair then, based on what you've said, to understand that as long as one of the usages of PFAS is reported, then that will open up eventually a more public inquiry around the usage and whether or not there should or should not be a ban. Is that correct?
Well, it doesn't open up the question. It just, if they want to regulate it, they'll have to go through it. In some cases, there's two different arguments they want to do. They don't want to argue with you that to regulate your substance. And then the last thing they want to do is argue with you, exempt you, and then have to justify to their citizens why they exempted you. So they have to go through that process to regulate it. They may choose not to, knowing their barriers. So they'll do two things. If they want to regulate, they have to go through all those different consultations and socioeconomic evaluations. But if they see it's used heavily in industry, they'll report on it, but they might decide not to regulate.
Okay, so still very important then, even if you're reporting to continue to advocate then for your own products, your own customers, and so on. And then, what's the situation, or where does the accountability or the responsibility fall, where, say, a manufacturer would purchase a finished part, but would not necessarily know what compounds it may contain, or if those compounds may contain themselves PFAS, right? Say for example, an electrical solenoid coil, right? The coil is potted. Not everyone necessarily knows what I mean, the manufacturer should know what he's putting in there, but whoever's buying that part may not be aware of the compounds in there. So whose responsibility is it at that point to report? And does something like that need to be reported?
Well, I'll talk legally and then practically. So in the legal part, for PFAS, it's the importer of the solenoid into Canada, whether it's in the product or separately as components. So if you buy the solenoid locally in Canada, install it, somebody else imported it, it's not your problem at all. For practical step, the way we had to when we had the questions, it's like, oh, we bring in solenoids. Awesome. Do you bring in over 10,000 a year? No, there's no chance you have anything that's reported. Or if you do, cool, it's this thing. And this is the one thing we have to check. So whether you want to ask your supplier or it's a really simple test here. That's one of the nice things about the testing for PFAS. It's very commodity based now. It's very easy. So we try to simplify it. Like, you need this many solenoids. You have that many solenoids? No. Then you won't have anything reported. If you did have more, it's this one chemical, so you can choose to report it, or we can check for it, or work with your supplier on it. But it's usually a pretty straightforward thing. So it's the importer's responsible of the solenoid where it brings it in. However, the way we often handle it is saying, before we get worried too much of the details, how many are there? This many? Don't worry about it. Or, okay, yes, now we have to do more. Then this is what we do.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other questions on the floor?
So, two legal things about this. This is Section 71. It's importer based. The plastics registry, when it rears your ugly head for you guys, and especially in 2026, it's brand owner based. So the brand owner is responsible if they have an office in Canada. If they have no entity in Canada, then it's the importer. But it's kind of two different systems where PFAS, this is all importer based. The plastics registry, when it comes along, is going to end, it's brand owner based, independent of how it's imported.
Okay. Now we do have a question from Tony Bucci. If you are a manufacturer and making injected molded plastic parts used for your final products, will this be any issue on the resins used if they contain any PFAS?
Yes. So it's if you're going from powder level to physical product you're manufacturing, So usually we'll have to report that if you have above the reporting limit. Again, if the polymer is going to be, it's a PTFE, it needs to have 100 kilograms of it, which you might have, of the PTFE. So if so, then yes. But if it's also not touched by dermally during the intended use, the reporting is very simple. Sometimes it's like you can do a lot of the math or it's close enough, just report it, because simplified reporting is actually relatively simple.
Okay, maybe we have time for one more question here.
So if you're integrating, you're not manufacturing, like you're putting like different parts together, but if you're actually manufacturing from chemical, then you might have to report for that. But otherwise, it's importation.
Oh, we have a question from Ted O'Donnell. Go ahead, Ted.
Thanks, Stefan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Just quick question. Bruce, since we are the Canadian Fluid Power Association, can we make a declaration on behalf of the membership that these products are being used in our industry?
Yes, you can actually. It doesn't stop any direct reporting requirements individual companies have, but you can definitely do a declaration of stakeholder interest. You're a potential stakeholder.
Yeah. Okay. So that just allows us to make representation for some smaller interested stakeholders who might not have reason to do so.
That, and if they do look at those, they'll have to ask you first about them, so you'll get a heads up on anything in that space.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, like the other system, so the stakeholder interest is through the main system. So we need somebody with the Government of Canada key, which is very exciting. But lots of people, I mean, all of us have one, but it'll be done by an individual. So if it's done in the Canadian Fluid Power Association, it's still done by an individual, and then you attach it or identify it's on behalf of the CFPA.
Okay,
If you need help, we can help you with it. It's a slightly non-intuitive system.
Thanks.
No problem.
All right. Any other questions? Last call for questions. Okay. Well, with that, Bruce, on behalf of the CFPA, thank you very much for presenting today on the webinar, and I'd like to thank the membership for excellent attendance. And if there's any questions, once again, the webinar has been recorded, and we will get a chance to get a copy of the slides from Bruce as well. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Great day, everyone.
Thank you very much, Bruce. To everyone on the line, once the recording is ready, I will be distributing it to everybody who registered, as well as posting it to the members only section of the website. And the board of directors will be working on next steps. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Trish.
Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye, everybody.